Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Academic Resource Center's Academic Success Webinar Series. I am Ashley Bray. I am the Disability and Learning Skills Specialist at the School of Continuing Studies. I have my colleague here, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Ballat. I'm the Learning Skills Specialist on main campus.
So this is our very last webinar for the academic school year. You guys are almost there. Just heading into that home stretch of finals. So appropriately, we're going to be talking about finals prep today and just really hopefully giving you guys some tools and resources to make realistic study plans and set yourself up for success for going into the next week of finals, and especially utilizing those study days that you have next week appropriately. Again, you can stay connected with us, especially in the summer, on Facebook and Instagram, so follow us on social media. I did want to say we will not be doing any webinars over this summer. We're all going to take a little bit of a break, but we will be starting back up next fall. If you are here on campus during the summer taking classes and do need some support around study skill strategies, or just want to do a meeting or stop in to look at our resources, both Annie and I will be here this summer. The office is open, so make sure you reach out to us. All right, so for this webinar, what we did was we took questions from students and then that they had around finals, concerns that they had. So the way it's set up is we'll do a question from a student, and then we'll go over some resources and tools and just do a little bit of back and forth like that. So the first question is, how early should I be studying for finals? Start as soon as you can. Start now. Finals start next Friday, so you're about a week out. So now is a good time to start getting organized and organizing your study materials. I think a lot of times students underestimate how much time it is to organize your study materials. And that's just not, making sure you have pencils and pens in your notebooks, but can you go in and highlight or flag important sections of a material that's going to be on the exam? Are you organized by class? Do you have any study sessions, group meetings organized? So start organizing your study materials today. Plan out how you're going to use your study days. I think for a lot of students, study days can seem overwhelming. And so I think having a really good plan about how you're going to use them, what you're going to study each of those days. Is it going to a study session with the TA? Is it meeting with the group? Is it working on a paper? Plan out how you're going to use them, and then put that in your calendar to hold yourself accountable and keep a study schedule, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But the study days for the university are May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Start forming a study group with your peers. Keep 2 separate documents so that you can start noting what will be on the exam and what you might be unsure of. And this will come back into play a little bit later. I think we have some more questions on this and how to follow up with your faculty members and TA. And start maximizing your time now. So as you're winding down the last week of classes, do you have a 15-minute break that you can use just to review some vocab words for your French exam? Do you have 20 minutes to pop in and see your TA to get some clarification on your chem exam? So start, maximizing your time, find out where you have spots in your schedule and utilize those.
All right, second question that we were sent was, I'm feeling overwhelmed with all the work and studying I have in order for finals. Where should I even begin? All right, and here are some things to think about, some questions to consider. So are you in the habit of cramming for tests and exams? We really highly, strongly encourage you not to cram. So really coming up with a study schedule, like Ashley was alluding to earlier, about how can you actually be effective with your time. Breaking up work over a period of days is more helpful for retention. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Are you pulling all-nighters throughout the week? Again, let's not do that. Think about how can we actually maximize our time over a period of days rather than waiting until the last day so that you are staying up all night, not getting enough sleep, not eating well. That's definitely not the cycle that we want to continue to promote. And are you feeling overwhelmed thinking about your final to-do list? So this is a really good time to start thinking about, okay, what remaining assignments do you have? What's on your final to-do list before the end of classes next week? And then thinking about, okay, what does my actual final schedule look like? So this is where all of these things come into play when creating a study schedule. All right, so some other things to consider. Knowing the material that needs to be studied is very, very important. Is it cumulative exam? Is it just on certain units? So thinking about each final exam you have, what material is going to be covered on it. And like Ashley mentioned, starting now. So starting to prepare what type of material, how can you organize your notes, how can you put everything together so that when you do sit down for study days, that you already have that information prepared. Thinking about your high and low periods of concentration, and this is really important. If you know that you are not a night person, don't set up a study schedule where you are trying to do work or write a paper past 7, 8 p.m. Make sure that you are dedicating time in the morning or the afternoon to really get a lot of your study time and writing done. So for study days, no one has classes, right? So really thinking about how can you utilize those days of work to really maximize your productivity. And we've talked about this before, setting in time blocks. So research shows retention increases when you actually study about a 45, 50-minute period with a 10 to 15-minute break in between. And Ashley just talked about incorporating breaks. So making sure that you're not studying for hours and hours on end, making sure you're chunking down your time so that you are retaining more information in a shorter period of time and you're actually able to probably sustain longer periods of studying throughout those study days. Study the same schedule throughout the week. So again, research shows if you study the same material a little bit each day, you're going to retain the information and understand it more thoroughly once time comes for your final exam. And then thinking about your environment. Have you found a place on campus that really suits your productivity? Or is there a place, if you've kind of set up a study working environment in your dorm room or in your apartment? So really finding what type of environment you can be the most productive during those study days and just, throughout final exams is really something to take into consideration. And then thinking about your learning style. Again, this is not necessarily the end-all be-all way to study, but it's definitely something to consider. Are you a visual learner? Should you be looking at flashcards and diagrams to really understand the information? Are you an auditory learner, maybe listening to videos or recordings or listening back to lectures could be helpful for you? So thinking about all these different types of factors is really something to keep in mind when creating a study schedule.
So we're going to show you 2 different types of study schedules that we like and that we've used in the past and students seem to like and works well. The first one is would be appropriate for this week. So your last week of classes, you still have internship work, dinner with friends, and you can do this in your Google Calendar. This is just a printout of a calendar. But like we discussed, finding those blocks in your schedule to maximize your time. So on Mondays between 11 and 3, this student has a lot of time to maximize their work day and find some time to study or maybe work on a final paper. Or even like this little hour block on Tuesday between office hours and class, maximizing their time. Or even those kind of 15-minute breaks. But what I would recommend doing for this student is they have their weekly schedule kind of already printed out and worked out, but going back in and with a different color to highlight it and make sure it's seen is filling in these areas where they can be utilized for study time. And what I like about this and what you can use on your Google Calendar is you can create priorities for this week that are just regular priorities or special priorities. So making sure you're getting to those last office hours before the final exam, making sure you're getting those final papers in. So kind of being able to prioritize and really keep an eye on what's important and what's due this week. This is another example of a study schedule, and I actually really, really like this one because the way this one works is it builds upon each other. So the knowledge that you start with, so you're starting with chapter 1 on Sunday just by preparing it. At this point in the semester, Chapter 1 probably seems like forever ago. So going back and reviewing that old information first is important to help build that foundation of knowledge. And as you can see, as the week progresses, the study schedule reflects that we're building upon that, baseline knowledge. So on Monday, they're preparing Chapter 2 and reviewing what you prepared in Chapter 1. And as you can see, from Sunday to Monday, it's 2 hours on Sunday on Chapter 1, 30 minutes on Monday for Chapter 1, and that's because you're really just reviewing it at that point. And as you can see, as the week progresses, we're doing this with each of the chapters, so you're spending less and less time. So Tuesday, 15 minutes, Wednesday, 10 minutes, and then Thursday, just 1 minute. You're spending less and less time as the week progresses, building on that foundational knowledge, because you should already have that there, and start adding in some of the newer concepts, the newer chapters that might be on the exam.
And this really goes to show that this student has set up the study schedule where they are looking at the material a little bit each day, which is what we kind of just talked about. So instead of just doing chapters 1 through 4 on Sunday and then not looking at it again for a week, this is a really great schedule that kind of breaks up the material so that it's definitely less overwhelming, because you might have other papers or other tests to study for, but again, it really helps with that retention to look at it a little bit each day. So I really like this schedule.
And I think Amy makes such a great point. It's almost like doing a little mind trick for you, because it's a lot more in your head. It's a lot more manageable to say, I'm going to study for 20 or 30 minutes each day on this material than saying I'm going to spend 5 hours the day before the exam studying. It feels like it's a little bit more broken down. It's not as big of a mountain to climb. It's just more manageable. And I think especially for students, finals are already stressful enough. Breaking it down like this really helps manage not only the material and making sure that you're retaining the material, but it also helps manage your stress. And the one last thing I wanted to point out, and I know we're going to talk about this later because we love talking about this, is on Thursday, this student scheduled 1 hour for a self-test on all the material. And I think that's really important. So as you're planning out your study schedules for the next couple of days, the next 2 weeks, make sure you're including time for self-testing in there.
And I would actually even say self-testing could possibly happen every single day. It depends on the range of self-testing, and we're going to go through different strategies. But yeah, self-testing is really the way that you can assess whether you really have understood the material, and that's something to really incorporate each day.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, if I have to cram for a final exam, what's the best strategy for late night cramming? Again, ARC does not promote cramming, but if you have to,
we get it. Sometimes things happen.
Thinking about how can you break down the material within the few day period that you've set aside is really something that I would say would be your #1 priority. Thinking about if you do have a cumulative exam and you've only left yourself a few days, how can you break it up over 1 day, over a period of days, so that you aren't, like Ashley mentioned, studying for 5-8 hours on end. You're incorporating those breaks, but you're really chunking material down to maybe a chapter or a whole unit, or lecture notes based on the date. So really thinking about how can you break down material to make it more manageable. Research also shows that putting things in your own words is another great way to retain information. So summarizing information, as if you have a lot of reading to do, if you have a lot of notes to do, rewriting things in your own words, or even talking out loud to somebody, but putting things in your own words is really going to help with your retention as well. Implementing self-testing strategies, we're definitely going to be more specific with this in a few slides. And again, self-testing is the best way to assess whether you actually understand the information. Just reading slides over and over, reading your notes over and over doesn't necessarily tell me if you actually understand it, and you can apply it to certain questions or make connections based on questions in class or application-based questions. So really thinking about how can you self-test yourself to make sure that you do understand the information. And then taking breaks. So keeping in mind that 45-50-minute period of work time with a 10 to 15-minute break. The break should unfortunately be boring. And what I mean by that is not social media, not Netflix. Unfortunately, those may just turn into a rabbit hole. effect and you're on some video that you have no idea how you got there, and it's been an hour, 2 hours. So making sure you're implementing breaks, but really breaks that allow you to reset, refocus, step away from the material. Maybe it's going to take a walk, or it's listening to some music or a podcast. It's doing something that allows you to take a step away, take a break, but then come back to it and not deter yourself from getting back on track. And then definitely making sure you're putting in some healthy meals and sleep cycle. Workout, maintaining as much of a healthy routine as you can if you are kind of strapped for time. And then making sure we're not trying to cram in any new information the morning of the exam. We want to make sure that, like Ashley mentioned, we're reviewing over and over for a few days prior, but not learning any new information. And then focusing on the material that you might not be as confident in, and that's where coming up with that Google Doc or that piece of paper that you're listing certain concepts or questions that you might want to ask a professor is really helpful. So you can hone in on that particular information because you've noted it as you're not as comfortable.
And I think, Annie, a great tool to maybe identify what you're not as confident in is self-testing, where you can kind of even start, if you do have to cram, again, not recommend it, but if you do have to cram, can you start off with some self-testing of the material to see where there are areas of maybe needing some more support, some more studying, and so that really helps you target what little time you do have to study and what it needs to be on.
Okay, our next question is, are there any strategies for taking a multiple choice exam or a true-false exam? So we're going to get into some specific strategies in a second, but first, this is just general test-taking strategies, and it's deter. So number 1 is directions, 2 is examine, 3 is time, 4 is easiest, and 5 is review. So 1 for directions, making sure that you are reading all of the directions on your exam, on your essay, making sure you know the expectations, you're comfortable with the prompt, you know what is expected of you, especially for multiple choice questions or true-false questions or even some short answer questions. Sometimes a really good trick is to actually rewrite the question in your own words. So if you're getting confused about what the professor's actually asking, sometimes it's helpful to, on a piece of paper, on a scrap paper, rewrite what you think is being asked of you and then compare. A lot of students may say, like, that's going to take us a lot of time. Well, it's something that I would definitely practice prior to the final exam. Don't just start implementing it during your final and that's the first time you've tried. But it could be something that helps clarify or parse out the information and figure out what types of information do you need to actually answer the question. So that's something to keep in mind. But making sure you do a preview of the test before. This is going to be moving on to examine. So examine the entire test to see how much you have to do or what types of questions are going to be asked of you. Is it a mix of multiple choice, true, false, some open-ended, and an essay? Or is it just an essay? Or is it just multiple choice? So doing a examine of your exam to see what types of questions are going to be asked of you. One thing I like to tell students is to maybe, as you're doing that preview of the exam, is to note questions that are similar in nature to one another. So maybe question number 3 is similar in some ways to 5, which is kind of similar in some ways to 7. Maybe they're using the same formula or they're using kind of addressing the same concept. So as you're then actually going back to answer the questions, once you get stuck on one of those questions, you can go back to one of the prior questions and say, okay, what information did I use to answer number 2? Can that help me answer number 5 now? Or maybe there's some information in 7 that can help allude to what I'm supposed to do in number 5. So something to consider. Another good thing to think about as you're doing the examine portion of this test-taking strategy is to do a brainstorm next to questions that you may be unsure of, or especially for open-ended questions and for essay. I think we highly recommend doing a brainstorm, maybe doing like a mini outline if you can. I know sometimes you don't necessarily have a lot of space on these tests, but really starting to think about how can you plan out your ideas, how can you outline these short answers, these essay questions before just diving in. So getting a brainstorm down, starting to think through how you want to answer this question is a really good thing to think about. And then just the last thing is to write out formulas or information as soon as you can as you're looking through the exam. So a lot of students are nervous that they're going to forget a formula on the last page as they're completing it. So a lot of students will, as soon as they open the exam, they do a quick preview, start jotting down information that they want to remember, but they don't want to have to just remember it in their brain. They want to get it down on the piece of paper so that they can just be comfortable answering the questions. All right, so number 3 is time. So making sure once you've examined the entire test, decide how much time you're going to spend on each section. And this could just be an estimate, and it could be something that you just note in the top right or left-hand corner of your paper, so that you can make sure you're doing your own time check, making sure you're going to finish within the certain time parameters, and you're allotting enough time for each of those different sections. And making sure part of self-testing strategy is going to be practicing taking exams or quizzes prior to your final exam, making sure you're putting yourself in the same time parameters that you are going to experience during those finals. So practicing taking a quiz or a test within a 50-minute period or with an hour and 15 minutes, whatever you're going to be given for the final, make sure you practice that prior to the final. All right, moving along. So number 4 is easiest. And this is something that definitely could be a personal preference. As you examine the test, kind of note questions that are similar in nature, kind of estimate the amount of time things are going to take you. A lot of students go in and they'll answer the easiest questions first, or the ones that they feel more comfortable answering. A lot of the thinking behind this is that if they answer those questions first, they can allot more time at the end for the questions that they feel more difficult. Some students like to do the reverse. Some like to do answering the most difficult questions first because they're just ones that they really want to knock out, and they feel like at the end, then they can answer the questions that are more comfortable. Again, something that sometimes is personal preference, but I wouldn't try this brand new strategy during your final exam. Think about how can you incorporate this in the prep stage prior to the final. And then the last part is review. So making sure you leave enough time at the end to review your answers and making sure they're as complete and as accurate as possible. Okay, so that's the deter strategy. More information, we can certainly send out that information to you if you're interested, but that's just something to keep in mind.
So let's talk about multiple choice exams. And there's a couple just strategies and things to keep in mind as you're taking a multiple choice exam. And what I like about these strategies is you're interacting with the exam. You're not just reading the questions. Some of us learn differently. I'm a type of person who learns by like writing things out, writing my notes out. And so for me, this is really helpful when I'm taking exams because I get to interact with it and my brain is able to process the questions in a little bit of a different way. So the first one, circle or underline any important words in the question. This doesn't have to be used just for multiple choice exams. I actually think this is a great strategy if you have an essay question you need to do. Read all of the answers choices before selecting one. I think sometimes if you're doing those easiest questions first, like Annie mentioned, you start getting really comfortable, but there might be the professor might try to trick you, or there might be something in there that doesn't sound similar. So just make sure you're reading all those choices first. Cross out any answer choices you are certain that are not correct. Look for 2 answer choices that are opposites, and look for hints about the correct answer choice and other items on the test. And I think this goes back to what Annie was saying, that there might be some connections through some of the questions on the exam that can give you hints to some of your other answers. Look for answer choices that contain language used by your teacher or found in your textbook. Those are going to be good clues, kind of good memory jogs for you. Do not change your initial answer unless you are sure another answer choice is correct. If you're unsure at all, maybe make that one of the harder ones and come back to that a little bit later. Choose all of the above if you are certain only all the answer choices in the items are correct, and just as the same for none of the above, only if you're certain that all the items are incorrect. All right, true-false exams. So for true-false exams, you should choose true for an item only when you are sure that the entire statement is true. So you can break down the statement, and just like the next bullet point says, long sentences often include groups of words set off by punctuation. Pay attention to the truth of each of these phrases. If one is false, this usually indicates a false answer. So making sure that the entire statement is true for those longer sentences, and if not, then your answer is most likely going to be false. Negative words in true or false exams can be very confusing. So if the question contains negatives, such as no, not, cannot, drop the negative and read what remains. So you would drop the no, not, or cannot and read the statement as is. Decide whether that sentence is true or false. If it is true, the statement is actually the opposite, which usually means the statement is false. So just some tips for true-false exams. Again, we don't suggest implementing all of these strategies at once, but pick a couple that might work for you. Use them when you're self-testing, and if you're comfortable with those, then you can use them during your finals.
Okay, next question is, how do I actively engage in the material I'm studying to retain the most information? And here we are, my favorite topic on self-testing strategies. So we've kind of talked about a few of these, so we will go through a lot of these strategies. Organize the material into meaningful clusters. So this could be based on topic, it could be lecture date, it could be this is all unit 1 and this is all unit 2. How can you make sure the material is organized? And we definitely encourage you to do this prior to when you sit down to study. So if you've dedicated a good chunk of time on the study days for studying chemistry, it's better to have that information prepared and organized prior to sitting down so you can actually spend those 3 hours or that time dedicated to actually studying and not organizing and then studying. Create associations with the material, so coming up with examples, real-world connections, or applications that will help you remember the information later on. Examples is a really good way to remember information. If your professors give examples, I would write those down during lecture and make sure that you remember those or kind of study those as you are preparing the information. We mentioned this, so completing practice exams in test-like conditions, so within the same time parameters as well as within the same environment. So I encourage students to not take tests in bed, because we're not going to take that during the final exam. Unfortunately, you can't take your final exam in bed. So making sure you're set up in a productive study environment, you're putting yourself within the same time parameters so that you are practicing that type of environment before getting into the final.
And I think a good suggestion would be if you have other friends who you might be in a study group with or your roommates who are all studying for finals, maybe you guys all self-test at the same time. So you just kind of get that environmental feel and then everyone's very quiet, focusing on that self-testing strategy. And then you guys can kind of compare notes afterwards of where you had confusion or what you felt really comfortable with.
Yep, exactly. Using different outlines for notes depending on the course and material. I think Ashley mentioned this before. Both her and I are very visual learners, so we kind of think about how can we structure information in more of a visual manner that maybe makes more sense for some classes than others. So thinking about, can you do a mind map, or can you do some sort of graphic organizer that puts the information in more of a picture form rather than a written word form? Maybe you are someone that learns better by the standard kind of outline of notes, and making sure that your notes are structured in that way is going to be really helpful. But thinking about is there some classes that you can depict information in a different manner that'll help you retain it a little bit more.
And we have it's very short 20-minute webinar from last semester, I think, on note-taking and outlining strategies that you can kind of look at, review, and fast forward through to what works for you. But there's some great note-taking and outlining methods like mind mapping, like just a standard outline, like the Cornell method, that could be really helpful in your prep for final exam studying.
And always keeping in mind, how can you put things in your own words, especially if you're rewriting your notes, making sure those things are in your own words. So making flashcards, word cards, question cards, either using Quizlet or using kind of your own system. That's definitely a good way to retain information and just do that kind of simple recall. And then flip it over. So don't always just look at the vocab word and you have to recite the definition. Flip the card over, look at the definition so that you have to recite the vocab word. So make sure that you are switching it up in order to assess yourself. Work through practice problems, especially if that's the format that your final exam is going to be, make sure you're working through practice problems, especially on the quizzes and tests that you might have missed. So making sure that you are comfortable with those questions, making sure you're comfortable with those concepts prior to the final. And then redrawing information from memory, studying in groups like Ashley mentioned, or with one-on-one with a peer. So if you're able to teach material to somebody else, that's going to help with your retention. I'd like to throw in this voice memo app strategy. So if there is not someone in the class that you want to study with, just talking out loud to yourself about the material and recording it. And then you can listen back to your recording and have your notes in front of you to make sure that what you're saying in the recording is actually what is listed on your notes. So again, talking out loud to a friend or to yourself and then listening back to is a really good thing to think about. Making self-tests. So this can also be on Quizlet as well, your own kind of system, but predicting what types of questions are going to be on the exams and then answering them is a really great self-testing strategy.
All right, after a few study sessions, I always have a list of things I'm confused on. What should I do? This is very normal, and I think the best thing you can do is, one, make a list of things you're confused about. We talked about it before, having those kind of separate documents. Just have a document open, whether it's a Google Doc, a sheet of paper, or even in the notes section of your calendar. Just keep a running list of questions that you have that you need to follow up on so you're not forgetting anything. Biggest recommendation, and I would recommend this for every student, whether or not you're confused or not, go to your professor's office hours. That's why they're there. They want you to come and utilize them. They're going to be able to help clarify things up. They might even give you some hits on what might be on the exam. So go utilize those office hours. In the same way, engage in review study sessions that your faculty members or TAs might host. Those are great places to kind of narrow down what's going to be on the test and kind of gut check yourself with some of your other peers in class. Follow up with your TA, and then discuss anything that you might be confused with a peer study group. I think that's really helpful. And again, sometimes just being able to have those discussions with peers can kind of calm some nerves. Oh, so you're confused on this too, let's find a way to work through it.
And the other thing with study groups that's helpful is someone else's understanding may not match your own understanding, which actually could provide you some clarification. Sometimes some information may be presented a little bit confusing in class, but the way that one of our peers understands it and able to recite it or articulate it actually may make more sense to us. So really kind of bouncing ideas off one another, just talking about material is a really good thing to think about. Yep. Wonderful. Okay, so the next question is, are there any good apps to help make studying for finals easier? And we've done a webinar on apps, so that is information you can also find on our website. There's another link also on the website under academic resources for apps as well. But here's just a few of our favorite ones. Quizlet, which I think everyone's familiar with. You can make your own flashcards, word cards. You can make your own tests. I know there is also a section where you can search by content or by course to see if other people have created different types of study material. I wouldn't bank all of my grades on other people's work, but it could be something that you can kind of compare your own flashcards with other people's or see if there's maybe some information that you might be missing. Duolingo is a really good app for foreign language practice. Evernote is one of our favorite note-taking apps, a really good way to kind of gather information all in one place. You can add diagrams and pictures along with your written notes and things from your computer. So putting all the information in one place is really helpful, especially going into finals. That's a great prep strategy for your study days. Is something that you could start doing now. Is if you use Evernote to go ahead and make a notebook for each of your classes and start making sure all the materials in one place or all your notes are in one place. And it's a great thing moving forward into the next semester, which seems so far away, but to make sure that you're keeping all your notes in one place so it makes these study days a little bit easier and on the prep end. Exactly. Self-control, I know a lot of students say that they have tried this on their computer, so it's an app that allows you to block certain websites for a certain amount of time. And even if you turn off your computer or break it in half, fortunately, you will not be able to access those websites. So this could be good for those students that find themselves wandering onto Facebook or Twitter or news while they're trying to be productive, and this really eliminates those types of distractions. Timeout is an app that encourages breaks like we've talked about, so making sure you are taking those 10 to 15-minute breaks periodically, and this is something that you can set a timer for a chunk of time. Whenever you want to start taking a break, it'll remind you, and it's just a really good app to incorporate.
All right, how do I study for a take-home or open book exam? And these are great questions, especially, I know a lot of my students are taking online classes. A lot of professors give their exams in Blackboard and their open book, and a lot of times students think those are easier, that you can kind of skip out on some of the studying, and that's not always the case. So strategies for take-home exams. Don't just rely on your notes. You need to be able to study like you were taking the exam in class, because I think what happens and a lot with students that they get caught up and don't feel that they have enough time on take-home exams. Take the exam in a classroom-like environment. So make sure that when you're getting down to take the exam, don't do it in your room if your roommate's going to be coming in and out. Don't do it at Starbucks where maybe the Wi-Fi is shoddy. Make sure you're taking it in a classroom-like environment. Make sure you're reading the instructions carefully. Don't take the exam with your classmates. This is an individual exam. The honor code still holds true for take-home exams. My biggest recommendation, only because I've had this happen to me from personal experience, check your technology. Make sure you have a Wi-Fi connection that's strong. Make sure that your computer is charged. Make sure that you can access the exam. So I wouldn't wait until the very last minute to start these at midnight when UIS is not open and you can't call and troubleshoot questions. So there is some planning and time management involved with take-home exams. And if it is an open book exam, organize your notes in a way that are easily accessible during the exam. So highlight important dates or facts that you know you might need, and summarize main points in your own words so they're easily accessible, that you're able to get to them and get what you need. All right, and finally, just good luck. Here are some reminders. I know it's a stressful time. Everyone's feeling really overwhelmed, so make sure you're staying rested. Sleep is really, really important, that you're still eating healthy. You're finding a balance. It shouldn't be study for 24 hours straight. Find some balance. Incorporate a stress management technique. I know CAPS has a lot of resources. I think we have a couple on our website. Whatever it is that helps you keep stress at bay, whether it's walking or yoga or connecting with a friend or just like 1 hour of Netflix, find that and utilize it, because it is a very stressful time. Keep a positive mindset. And trust yourself and trust the work. You guys have done a lot of great work throughout this academic year and this semester. So have confidence that all the work that you've put in up to this point will be successful moving forward. Again, we are open during the summer, but we will not be having webinars until next semester. If you guys have any questions or any last-minute concerns or want to come check out the resources we have for finals, please feel free to stop by. We wish you guys all a great summer and hope to see everyone back here next fall for another year of Academic Success Webinar Series. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day and good luck with finals.
Good luck, everyone.